When HR lost my approved $15,000 raise in legal review, they thought I'd take the hint and sit down. They handed me a boilerplate severance package, told me my 5 years of contributions were non-transferable, and gave me 48 hours to vacate my desk. They assumed I was just another burned-out corporate employee who couldn't afford a lawyer. What they didn't know was that 3 years ago, when they forced me to sign a massive contract amendment for a software patch I wrote, I insisted on adding a single, obscure, legal royalty clause. At the time, they laughed and signed it without reading the fine print. But today, at the final settlement hearing, my lawyer didn't argue. He just slid a single piece of paper across the table. The legal team turned pale, the VP dropped his coffee, and the entire board was called into an emergency session. I'm about to trigger an $80 million royalty clause, and corporate is about to learn what happens when you play games with the wrong engineer. My name is Clara Vance, I'm 28 years old, and up until 6 months ago, I was a senior systems architect at one of the largest logistics conglomerates in North America. For 5 years, my life revolved around fluorescent lights, cold coffee, and thousands of lines of code. The corporate culture was brutal. 70-hour workweeks were treated as the bare minimum, and loyalty was rewarded with even more work. But I genuinely loved solving complex problems. During my 3rd year, while grinding through late-night shifts, I built an automated routing algorithm from scratch. It was designed to optimize delivery logistics, and within 6 months of deployment, it quietly saved the company tens of millions of dollars in fuel and operational costs. I became the unsung hero of the engineering floor, at least to the people who actually understood what I had built. When corporate management realized how powerful the software was, they decided to absorb it directly into the main enterprise infrastructure. To cover their bases, HR called me into a polished glass conference room and forced me to sign an intellectual property transfer agreement. I knew how corporate games worked, so before handing it over, I called a lawyer friend. We insisted on inserting one tiny, obscure addition into the fine print, a standard 1.5% micro-royalty clause on any future third-party integration revenue. The executives chuckled, signed it without a second thought, and assumed it would never be worth a single dime. By my 4th year, my algorithm was running the entire logistics network smoothly, and the company was posting record-breaking quarterly profits. During my annual performance review, my direct manager sat me down with a beaming smile. He handed me an exemplary evaluation, officially recommending me for a promotion to lead architect along with a well-deserved $15,000 salary increase. He assured me it was a done deal and that the updated compensation would reflect on my very next paycheck. I was thrilled. I felt like all those 90-hour weeks and missed weekends were finally paying off. But when my next paycheck arrived, my salary hadn't changed by a single cent. I figured it was just a payroll delay, so I waited patiently for the next pay cycle. Still nothing. When I finally scheduled a meeting with HR to resolve the issue, I was met by the director of human resources, a cold, calculating woman named Sarah, who wore corporate arrogance like a badge of honor. She leaned back in her leather chair, adjusted her glasses, and casually informed me that my raise had been lost in legal review. She claimed that sudden corporate budget freezes made the salary adjustment impossible, suggesting I should just be grateful to have a secure position. The real kick in the teeth came 2 days later. While grabbing coffee in the break room, I overheard Sarah talking to the regional VP. They were laughing about how naive tech workers were, openly boasting about how scrapping engineers' salary increases allowed the executive team to secure their massive quarterly bonuses. My raise wasn't lost in legal review at all. It was deliberately stolen to line their own pockets. Instead of backing down, I started pushing back. Every week, I sent polite but firm emails requesting an official status update on my missing compensation, attaching my written performance review and manager's approval. I wanted a clear paper trail, and HR hated every second of it. The retaliation was swift. On a rainy Friday afternoon at 4:30 p.m., Sarah summoned me into her office for a routine check-in. The regional VP was sitting beside her, looking like a judge preparing to pass sentence. Without a word of warning, Sarah slid a 2-page document across the desk. It was an immediate termination notice due to corporate restructuring. They handed me a pitiful severance package equal to just 2 weeks' pay. Attached to it was an extraordinarily aggressive non-disclosure agreement and a strict 3-year non-compete clause. Sarah leaned forward, her voice dripping with synthetic concern, and gave me an ultimatum. Sign the agreement right now to receive the 2 weeks' pay, or walk out immediately with nothing at all. She made sure to remind me that my 5 years of work were company property and completely non-transferable. I looked at the severance offer, then at Sarah's smug expression, and slowly pushed the papers back across the table and signed. Her smile evaporated instantly. I walked back to my desk under the watchful eye of a corporate security guard who had been instructed to escort me from the building. I packed my belongings into a single cardboard box in complete silence. But right before stepping into the elevator, I opened my bottom desk drawer and retrieved a worn leather binder containing my original, hard copy signed employment records and the IP transfer agreement they had completely forgotten about. That evening, I sat in my apartment with my friend and attorney, Mark. The rejection of their weak severance offer meant I left without a safety net, but I wasn't planning on letting them walk over me. I handed Mark the binder from my desk, including the original IP transfer agreement for my routing algorithm. While Mark began reviewing the legal definitions, I opened my laptop to check the company's recent public quarterly financial disclosures. I wanted to see how they were framing the corporate restructuring that got me fired. But as I scrolled through the investor reports, a strange line item under software licensing revenue caught my eye. The numbers didn't add up for internal operations alone. Mark started digging into industry trade databases and public regulatory filings, and within 2 hours, we uncovered something staggering. The company hadn't just used my automated algorithm to optimize their own internal shipping routes. Over the last 24 months, they had quietly white-labeled my proprietary code and licensed it out to 3 of the largest global freight and shipping conglomerates in the world. They were marketing my software as an enterprise fleet management solution. The total revenue generated from those external licensing deals over 2 years was a staggering $5.3 billion. Mark looked up from his legal pad, his eyes wide. He pointed directly to Section 4B of my original IP contract, the very clause the HR team had chuckled at 3 years ago. It explicitly stated that I was entitled to a 1.5% micro-royalty on all third-party integration and licensing revenue, backed by a severe late payment penalty clause. The math was undeniable. They owed me over $80 million, and they had just fired me over $15,000. 10 days later, Mark and I walked into the grand corporate boardroom on the 42nd floor. The company had requested this settlement meeting, assuming I was back with my tail between my legs, ready to beg for my 2 weeks severance. The room was oppressive, a massive mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and 5 high-priced corporate attorneys sitting alongside Sarah and the regional VP. They hadn't even bothered to offer us coffee. Sarah sat at the center with that same insufferable, patronizing smirk. Before we could even sit down, the lead corporate attorney tossed a thin manila folder toward us. He casually announced that, out of pure goodwill, the company was willing to offer a lump sum payment of $50,000. In exchange, I would sign a complete liability release, a total non-disparagement agreement, and walk away forever. Sarah added with a snicker that $50,000 was far more than the $15,000 raise I had been making a fuss about. Mark didn't say a word. He didn't even look at their folder. Instead, he opened his briefcase, pulled out a bound legal dossier, and slowly slid 3 copies across the polished table. On top was a certified copy of my original IP transfer agreement, highlighted in bright yellow at Section 4B, right beside an official audit of their $5.3 billion third-party licensing deals. "We aren't here for $50,000, Mark said calmly. "We're here to collect $80 million in unpaid royalties." The silence that fell over that boardroom was absolute. The lead corporate attorney picked up the dossier with an arrogant smirk, but as his eyes scanned the highlighted text of Section 4B and the attached third-party licensing audit, his face visibly drained of color. He stopped reading, looked slowly at Sarah, and then turned his gaze toward the regional VP. The VP leaned over, squinting at the page, and instantly dropped his pen onto the mahogany table. "Is this a joke?" The VP stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "It's no joke," Mark replied coolly. Your enterprise division licensed my client's proprietary algorithm to 3 global freight conglomerates without her knowledge or compensation. Under the terms your own legal department signed 3 years ago, Clara is owed a 1.5% royalty on all external integration revenue, plus back interest and late filing penalties. You have 48 hours to remit $80 million before we file a public lawsuit in federal court. Sarah's patronizing smirk completely vanished. She looked frantically between her legal team, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The lead attorney hurriedly called for an immediate executive recess, slamming his laptop shut as he grabbed his phone to call the chief legal officer and the board of directors. Corporate realized in real time that a public lawsuit wouldn't just force the payout. It would void their multi-billion-dollar external contracts for selling unauthorized code and utterly destroy their stock price. Their bulletproof corporate wall had completely collapsed. Within 72 hours, the company's board of directors quietly approved a full multi-million-dollar settlement to avoid total corporate ruin and public embarrassment. Sarah, the HR director, and the regional VP were both quietly terminated before the week was over for gross negligence and exposing the firm to catastrophic legal risk. I took my payout, officially walked away from corporate America, and launched my own independent software architecture firm, where engineers actually own the code they build. They thought they could steal a $15,000 raise from an employee they viewed as helpless. Instead, they handed me an $80 million lesson in reading the fine print. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever caught your company playing games with your compensation or contracts? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this corporate checkmate, make sure to check out the next story popping up on your screen right now.